The orbital station had seen better days. Its outer hull was patched in 7 places, the lights in the lower corridors flickered every few hours, and the heating system on the east wing had stopped working 3 winters ago. Nobody fixed it. There were no spare parts. The supply ships that used to come every month had stopped coming 2 years back, turned away at the edge of the system by Council enforcement vessels without a single word of explanation. Just a signal, a cold, an automated signal that said, "Access denied." Admiral Junho Wei stood at the observation window and watched one of those enforcement vessels now. It sat in the dark like a stone, massive and silent, its running lights blinking slowly. Behind it, a human cargo freighter was turning around. The third one this week. Junho watched it go and said nothing. He had stopped saying things about it a long time ago. Words didn't move council ships. He was not a tall man. He was not the kind of man who filled a room when he walked in. He was quiet, lean, and had a face that gave nothing away. The crew of the station called him the wall behind his back, not because he was hard to talk to, but because when he stood in front of something, it did not get past him. He had been stationed up here for 4 years. He had watched the blockade tighten like a rope around Earth's neck, slow and steady, and he had done his job, which was to keep the station running, keep his people calm, and wait. He was very good at waiting. Behind him, the door opened. Fleet Captain Minho Ray walked in, a data tablet in his hand, and dark circles under his eyes. Minho was younger than Yunho by 11 years, louder by nature, but smart enough to be quiet when it mattered. He stopped beside the Admiral and looked out at the enforcement vessel. Freighter 7 turned back, Minho said. "I saw." Junho said, "That's 41 ships this month." Junho said nothing. Minho set the tablet down on the console beside them. "Director Bay is ready. She's been waiting for 20 minutes. Junho finally turned from the window. "Then let's not make her wait longer." The bunker was deep. It sat beneath 300 meters of granite and steel, carved into the bones of the Himalayas during a time when Earth still believed that if they built something quietly enough, the Council would never find it. That belief had turned out to be correct. The Council never looked down. They never thought to. They were too busy looking at humans the way someone looks at a small, stubborn insect, with mild annoyance and no real concern. Director Yunabei was standing at the center of the operations room when Junho and Minho arrived via secure transport link. The room was wide and cold and filled with screens, most of them dark. The ones that were lit showed numbers, ship schematics, resource maps, and a single blinking green indicator in the corner that Junho had been watching for 14 years. Yuna was not the kind of person who wasted time on pleasantries. She was sharp-faced, sharp-minded, and had the posture of someone who had been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time and had simply gotten used to the weight. She nodded at Junho when he entered. "It's ready," she said. Those 2 words landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Minho exhaled slowly. Junho just looked at her. "All of it?" he asked. "All of it," she said. 200 ships, full loadout. Null drives tested and confirmed. Harrower systems calibrated. Aegis is hot. Daewon finished the last calibration run 4 days ago. We've been sitting on this, waiting for your word. Junho walked to one of the screens and looked at the indicator. 14 years! 14 years of building in secret, of feeding false reports to Council surveillance satellites, uses of moving parts through black channels and calling them agricultural equipment. 14 years of Earth's best engineers, physicists, and soldiers working in the dark, with no guarantee that any of it would ever matter. It had mattered. "What about Arium?" Junho asked. Yuna pulled up a transmission log. Ambassador Saul filed the grievance hearing request this morning. The Council accepted it. She paused. They laughed, by the way. Internal communication intercept. 3 council heads found it amusing. Minho made a sound in the back of his throat. "Let them laugh," Junho said quietly. 22 years ago, humanity had sent its first contact signal into the stars with something close to joy. They had imagined trade, discovery, the sharing of knowledge between civilizations. They had imagined being welcomed. What they got instead was a classification. Class 3 volatile species. Intelligent, the Council report had noted, but emotionally unstable, trebalistic, and demonstrably prone to internal conflict. Not suitable for full galactic participation. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. The restrictions came slowly at first. no access to the FTL relay network, no entry permits for resource-rich systems, observation protocols, then the colony dismantling orders, 7 human colonies beyond Sol, built over decades of effort, quietly declared illegal under council jurisdiction, and stripped. The people were sent back. The infrastructure was absorbed. Earth had protested through every legal channel available to them. They had sent delegations, filed motions, submitted evidence of their peaceful intentions. Every submission was received, logged, and buried. The council moved on to other business. What the council did not know, what they never suspected, was that a small group of people on Earth had made a decision in the 11th year of this slow erosion. They had looked at the legal channels, found them to be walls, and decided to build something else entirely. They called it Project Haiti, after the mythical beast that stood guard against disaster, and for 14 years they built it in the dark, with patience and precision and the particular kind of cold fury that comes from watching everything you love be slowly taken apart. Back on the station, long after the transmission ended, Junho returned to the observation window. The enforcement vessel was still there, still blinking, still silent. Minho came to stand beside him. "Are we ready?" he asked. Junho looked at the stars for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "We're ready." Nobody looked at the cleaning staff. That was the first thing Cheon-woo had learned when she arrived on Vithara Prime 11 years ago. She had stepped off a transit vessel with forged documents, a maintenance uniform, and a data chip sewn into the lining of her left boot, and not a single security officer had given her more than a passing scan. She was human. She was small. She was carrying a mop. The guards had looked through her like she was made of glass. She had decided then and there that being invisible was the most powerful thing a person could be. Vithara Prime was the beating heart of the Galactic Council. It was not a planet, but a station, though calling it a station felt like calling the ocean a puddle. It stretched across open space like a city that had forgotten to stop growing. Ring after ring of corridors and chambers and docking bays and assembly halls, all connected by transit tubes that hummed day and night. Millions of beings lived and worked here. Delegates, officers, scientists, diplomats, traders, and at the very bottom of that long list, maintenance workers. Cheon was, on paper, a maintenance worker. In reality, she was the most dangerous person on the station. She had spent 11 years learning the rhythms of the place. Which corridors were checked at what hour? Which security officers took long breaks? Which data terminals were connected to the main archive and which were isolated? She had learned 6 alien languages not from a program, but from listening, quietly, in hallways and break rooms and service tunnels, the way water learns the shape of stone, slowly, completely. She was 34 years old and looked 28 and had not spoken to her family in 4 years because contact was a risk she could not afford to take. She kept a small photograph tucked behind the lining of her locker. She looked at it sometimes. She did not let herself feel it too much. Feeling too much made your hands unsteady. Her hands were very steady. The final week began on a Tuesday. Cheon moved through her normal routine with the same quiet efficiency she had maintained for 11 years. She cleaned the floors of the Eastern Administrative Wing. She refilled the supply carts in the service hub on Level 9. She exchanged 4 words with a Velthori technician who always nodded at her in the corridor near the data center. She smiled back. She was always pleasant. Pleasant people were forgettable. But underneath the routine, she was moving pieces. For 3 years, she had been planting micro-relay nodes throughout the station. The nodes were small, smaller than a fingernail, and looked identical to the standard adhesive pads used to mount wall panels. She had placed them in stairwells, behind ventilation grills, beneath consoles in empty meeting rooms, and inside the casing of 3 separate data terminal housings on the floor that connected directly to the Accord vaults. The Accord vaults were where the council stored everything they wanted no one to see. Every sealed vote, every classified order, every private communication between council heads going back decades. The vaults were not connected to any external network. They were not accessible by any normal means. The only way in was physical, through a biometrically locked access corridor on the restricted upper levels that Cheon had never been authorized to enter. She didn't need to enter. She just needed to be close enough, and for long enough that her relay network could pull what she needed through the hairline gaps in the vault's internal data insulation. It had taken 2 years of careful positioning to make that possible. But last month, the network had gone live, and for the past 4 weeks, it had been silently, patiently copying 22 years of classified council records, document by document, file by file. All of it flowing through her invisible network and waiting in an encrypted buffer in the base of a false wall panel in a supply closet on level 4. On Thursday morning, she retrieved it. The data chip was no larger than her thumbnail. She palmed it in the service corridor on level 4, slipped it into the hidden pocket along her inner wrist cuff, and kept walking. Her heart rate did not change. She had spent years training it not to. That evening, in her small quarters in the maintenance staff housing block, she connected the chip to a concealed transmitter and sent a tight beam burst transmission. It lasted 4 seconds. It was aimed at a relay point 112,000 kilometers away, a piece of council-registered deep space debris that nobody had looked at in 6 years, because Cheyenne had quietly registered it as cleared and inactive in the maintenance logs 2 years back. From there, it would bounce through 4 more relay points before reaching Director Una Bay. She pulled the transmitter apart, separated its components, and flushed them in 3 different disposal units across 2 levels. Then she went to bed. She lay in the dark for a while. She thought about the photograph in her locker. She thought about the fact that after 11 years, she was finally done. Whatever came next was no longer in her hands. She had done her part. She had done it perfectly. She was asleep within minutes. She was nearly off the station when the alert went out. She was 3 corridors from the secondary docking bay, the one used by maintenance supply transports, which did not require passenger manifests, when she heard the security announcement echo through the corridor behind her. A routine phrasing, calm and official, but she recognized the code embedded in it. A data anomaly had been flagged. Maintenance log discrepancy. Level 4. She did not run. Running was the worst thing a person could do. She turned left instead of right, looped through a service tunnel, and came out near the docking bay from the opposite direction. A transport was sitting on the pad with its cargo ramp down, 2 Velthori dock workers loading supply crates. She walked up the ramp behind them, picked up a crate, and carried it inside. Nobody stopped her. The transport left 7 minutes later. In the security office on level 6, an officer stared at a maintenance ID that had been inactive for 6 months. He cross-checked it. The person it belonged to had no current room assignment, no active shift schedule, no recorded presence on the station for half a year. He called it in as a ghost account. By then, Cheyenne Wu was already deep in space, sitting quietly in a cargo bay, eyes closed, heading home for the first time in 4 years. She let herself feel it now, just a little, just enough. Her hands were still steady. The dark side of Titan was cold in a way that went past temperature. It was the kind of cold that settled into the bones and stayed there, that made the air feel thin even inside a heated facility, that reminded a person constantly, without mercy, that they were not supposed to be here. Saturn hung in the distance, enormous and quiet, its rings catching the faint light of the faraway sun. It was beautiful in the way that dangerous things sometimes are. Daewon-gi did not look at Saturn anymore. He had stopped noticing it years ago, the same way a man stops noticing the walls of the room he has lived in too long. He noticed the ships instead. He always noticed the ships. They were arranged in the shadow of Titan's largest crater, 194 of them docked in staggered rows that stretched farther than a person could see on foot. 6 more were in the final stages of systems check in the secondary bay, half a kilometer to the east. 200 total, 200 ships that did not exist according to every record in the Galactic database. 200 ships that had been built, piece by piece, part by part, over 14 years of the most careful work that human hands had ever done. Daewon walked the dock lines with Admiral Junho at his side and Captain Minho 2 steps behind. And he talked the way he always talked, in short, precise sentences, the way an engineer talks when he loves something too much to waste words on it. Hull composite is a hybrid, he said, gesturing at the nearest vessel. Our carbon lattice base, layered with a thermal scattering material we developed from a council hull fragment recovered from the debris field near the second colony site. They threw it out. We spent 6 years turning it into armor. He patted the hull with one hand. 30% more heat resistance than anything currently registered in the council fleet. And it doesn't show on their standard scan frequencies. Junho looked at the hull. How long did that take to develop? The scattering layer, 4 years. The bonding process to make it hold on our carbon base, another 2. Daewon shrugged the way a man shrugs when he has long since made peace with difficulty. We broke it 14 times before we got it right. They kept walking. The null drives were the thing that Minho had most wanted to see, and Daewon brought them to the engine bay of the lead flagship, a vessel that the crew had quietly started calling Haiti 1, where 3 engineers were running a final diagnostic on the drive core. The core was smaller than Minho had expected. It sat in its housing like a dark, smooth stone, pulsing faintly with deep blue light. The Council controls every FTL relay node in the charted galaxy, Daewon said. They are standing in front of it. Every ship that uses standard jump technology has to pass through their network, which means they can track it, block it, or collapse it. They used that control to keep us out of anywhere we weren't supposed to go. He looked at the drive. The null drive doesn't use the network. It folds space independently. No relay required. No trace on Council tracking systems. We can jump from here to Vathera Prime, and they won't know we're coming until we're already there. Minho stared at it. And it works? We've run 43 test jumps over the past 2 years. Short range, unmanned, every single one was clean. Daewon paused. The long-range manned jump is the one we haven't done yet. Because the first time we do it, Daewon said simply, it'll be all 200 ships at once. We didn't see the point of a dress rehearsal for that. Minho looked at Junho. Junho said nothing. He had already decided. The Harrower cannons were Daewon's masterpiece, and he knew it, though he would never say so. He showed them the test footage in a briefing room carved into the rock below the docking bay. The footage was from 8 months ago. An unmanned Council model patrol drone, obtained through methods that were not discussed, was positioned in open space at a range of 400 kilometers. The Harrower fired once. The drone did not explode. It did not crack or burn or spin out of control. It simply stopped. Every system aboard it collapsed simultaneously, as if the vessel had simply forgotten how to function. It hung in space like a sculpture, perfectly intact, completely dead. It disrupts the gravitational anchor of the target vessel, Daewon explained. Every ship in space maintains a microfield that keeps its internal systems oriented relative to its own mass. The Harrower collapses that field. Everything shuts down at once. Engines, weapons, communications, life support. He let that settle. The crew survives. The ship survives. It just goes dark. Junho looked at the frozen image of the dead drone. Why did you design it that way? You could have made it destructive. Daewon was quiet for a moment. Because destroying them would have ended the conversation, he said, and we need them to be awake and listening when the conversation happens. In the last hour of the walkthrough, Daewon brought them to the Aegis terminal. Aegis was not hardware. It was a program. Or more accurately, a system of programs woven together over 9 years into something that no longer fit neatly into any category. Its only purpose was to find the gaps in the Council's communication infrastructure. ET slipped through them without triggering a single alarm and pull the entire network apart from the inside in less time than it would take a Council officer to reach his console. The lead Aegis programmer, a young woman named Sori Han, sat at the terminal with the relaxed posture of someone who trusted her work completely. She looked up when Junho entered and gave him a single nod. "Ready," she said. That was all she said. As the sun dropped behind Saturn's rings and the shadow of Titan deepened around the fleet, Daewon Gi stood at the edge of the dock and looked out at the 200 ships he had spent the better part of his adult life building. He was 51 years old. He had missed his sister's wedding, his father's final years, and more nights of proper sleep than he could count. He had poured everything he had into this place, into these ships, into the quiet hope that they would be enough. The crew of the fleet had gathered on the dock behind him. Engineers, pilots, weapons officers, navigators, thousands of people who had worked in the same dark and the same cold for the same long time. They were looking at him. He hadn't planned to speak. He wasn't a man who made speeches, but he turned to face them, and for a moment, he just looked at them. "I built this hoping we'd never use it," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried. "Use it well." Then he stepped aside, and Admiral Junho Wei walked to the front of the dock, and the fleet prepared to move. Ambassador Arium Sol had been waiting for this room for 22 years. The Grand Assembly Chamber of the Galactic Council was the largest enclosed space she had ever stood in. Its ceiling disappeared into shadow 300 meters above the floor. Its seating tiers curved upward on all sides like the inside of a shell, filled with thousands of alien delegates from across the charted galaxy. Tall, scaled, many-limbed, gas-breathing, crystalline, soft, every shape and form that intelligence had decided to take. It smelled of alien atmospheres blended together, filtered, processed into something that every species present could breathe without dying. At the far end of the chamber, elevated on a curved platform that made them look like something between judges and gods, sat the 7 heads of the Galactic Council. Veth Orun of the Vetheran Collective was at the center, a creature the size of a small vehicle, its body a slow shifting mass of deep purple and gray, its many eyes arranged in a flat row across its upper body. It had been a council head for 90 years. It had dismissed humanity's first contact delegation personally in the 22nd year of human contact, with the same casual patience a person uses when brushing a fly from their sleeve. It was looking at Arium now with the same expression. Arium looked back at it without flinching. She was not an impressive physical presence. She was a middle-aged woman in a plain gray suit with her hair pulled back and a data reader in her left hand, and absolutely nothing in her eyes that resembled fear. She had spent 15 years as a diplomat in rooms where every species in them thought she was less than them. She had learned in that time to let people underestimate her. It was the last comfortable thing they ever did. She began to speak. For the first hour, the chamber was merely uncomfortable. Arium presented the evidence piece by piece, document by document, the way you lay stones across a stream, one at a time, each one solid, each one placed with care. The sealed council votes to classify humanity as permanently non-viable for full galactic standing. The internal communications discussing how to structure the blockade so that it looked like a health protocol rather than a resource denial. The order that had quietly dismantled the human colony on Race of 4, not because it violated any code, but because a veteran mining consortium had wanted the asteroid belt in that system, and the council head had owed them a favor. As the evidence mounted, the noise in the chamber changed. The low background hum of 1,000 alien conversations did not stop, but it shifted from boredom to unease, from unease to something that moved through the tiers like a slow current. The council heads remained still. Veth Orun's eyes did not move from Arium. Then came the communication files. These were internal council transcripts from the 9th year of contact, when humanity's second diplomatic delegation had presented a full record of their civilization's development and asked formally for trade access to the FTL relay network. The transcripts showed the council heads' private channel during that hearing. 3 of them had been sending each other commentary in real time. The translation was clean and accurate. One transcript read, "They're still talking. Should we tell them the decision was made before they arrived?" Another replied, "No. Let them finish. It's entertaining." The chamber went quiet for the first time. Arium did not pause. She kept going. Veth Orun moved. It was a slow movement, the kind that powerful creatures make when they have decided that a situation has gone on long enough. It raised one of its upper appendages, and the light above the council platform shifted from white to amber, the universal signal for hearing suspension. "These materials," Veth Orun said, its voice processed through a translation system into something deep and flat, "are fabricated. The council does not recognize them as legitimate. This hearing is suspended pending a review of the source," and the lights went out. Not just in the chamber, across the entire station, every corridor, every terminal, every display, every communication relay, everything went dark at once. For 3 full seconds, the Grand Assembly Chamber sat in complete blackness, filled with the sounds of thousands of beings suddenly very alert and very uncertain. Then the screens came back on, not in amber, not with the council's seal. Every screen in the chamber, every display on every tier, lit up with the same image. It was a view from space, taken from a distance that made the scale hard to process at first. Then it became clear. 200 ships, human ships, arranged in perfect formation outside Vithara Prime, so close that their running lights were visible from the station's outer observation windows. They sat in absolute stillness, in tight, disciplined rows, not moving, not firing, not sending any aggressive signal, just there, present, unavoidable. The noise that went through the chamber then was not describable in any single language. Admiral Junho Wei appeared on every screen a moment later. He was seated, not standing. He was not in battle gear. He was in a plain uniform. And he spoke the way he always spoke, quietly, without performance, as if he were discussing something simple. He told the council that every document Arium had presented was real. He told them that this data was, at this exact moment, being broadcast on every open frequency in the galaxy, to every species, every independent world, every colony, every listening post that could receive a signal. He told them that the fleet outside their station had not come to destroy anything or anyone. He told them that the Harrower cannons aboard those ships could disable every vessel in the Council's home fleet in under 4 minutes without killing a single crew member, and that he would prefer very much not to do that. He told them that humanity was done asking. Then he said, "Ambassador Sol will continue her presentation. I suggest you listen." The screen went back to the chamber feed. Arium Sol was still standing at the floor of the chamber. She had not moved during any of it. She looked up at the 7 council heads on their platform. Veth Orun's row of eyes were fixed on the screens showing the human fleet outside. 2 of the other council heads were already speaking quietly and urgently to their aides. Arium picked up her data reader. "Where were we?" she said. It was not a question. She kept going. By the time she finished, the chamber had been sitting in stunned silence for nearly 4 minutes. The delegates in the tiers were not talking to each other. They were watching. The enforcement fleet that the council had quietly signaled during the blackout had not moved. It was sitting 6,000 kilometers away from the human formation, and it had not moved closer by a single meter because whoever was commanding it had looked at 200 unknown ships with unknown weapons sitting in perfect, patient stillness, and had made a sensible decision. Arium closed her data reader. She looked up at the council platform one final time. Veth Orun said nothing. The chamber said nothing. The galaxy, for the first time in its long and crowded history, was completely quiet. Arium pulled out a chair, sat down, folded her hands on the table in front of her, and waited. Her face was calm. Her posture was relaxed. She looked like a woman who had all the time in the world. She had waited 22 years. She could wait a little longer. The first day after the hearing was the loudest day in galactic political history, and humanity spent most of it saying very little. The broadcasts had reached every major system within 6 hours. By the end of the first day, the Galactic Council's Central Communication Network had received over 40,000 incoming transmissions from species, independent worlds, colony stations, and individual delegates across the charted galaxy. Most of them were asking the same question in different languages. Is it true? A significant number of them already knew the answer. Because the evidence Cheon had pulled from the Accord Vaults was not just about humanity. It was about the Accord Vaults themselves, about what was in them, and several of those files contained records that mentioned other species, other blockades, other quarantine protocols that had been applied quietly to civilizations that had grown too fast or occupied too valuable a piece of space. The Council had been running this game for a very long time. Humanity had simply been the first to open the vault and show the board. On Vethara Prime, the political structure of the Council began coming apart by the second morning. Not dramatically, not with shouting or collapse, but in the precise, quiet way that power structures fail when the people inside them start calculating which side is safer. 2 member species, the Orathian Confederacy and the Sulan Worlds, issued formal statements requesting an emergency constitutional review of Council authority. They did not condemn the Council directly. They didn't need to. The request said everything. 3 of the 7 Council heads stopped appearing in public. Veth Orun made one last move. It was not unexpected. Admiral Junho had been waiting for it since the hearing ended. On the morning of the second day, Captain Minho relayed an intercepted command signal, encrypted, but not well enough, ordering a Council enforcement fleet of 30 ships to converge on Vethara Prime and remove the human fleet by force. The order was framed as a station security response. The language was careful. The intent was not. Minho brought it to Junho on the bridge of Haiti-1. Junho read it. He handed the tablet back to Minho and turned to the weapons station. "Sorry," he said. Sori-Han looked up from her console. "One shot." The drone marker at grid point 7. Sori turned back to her screen. "Target acquired." "Fire." The harrower fired once. At the edge of the system, 300 kilometers from the nearest council vessel, a standard military drone, one that Daewon's team had deployed before the fleet jumped in, positioned precisely for this moment, stopped dead in space. Every system aboard it went dark simultaneously. It hung there, completely intact, completely silent, in full view of every sensor on the Council enforcement fleet that was currently sitting 6,000 kilometers away, engines hot, heading toward the human formation. The enforcement fleet stopped. For 11 minutes, nothing moved. Then, one by one, the Council ships turned around. They did it slowly, without communication, the way people leave a room when they have decided they do not want to be part of what happens next. Minho watched the last one turn on the nav display. He breathed out. "That's it," he said. "That's it," Junho said. On the third day, 2 of the 3 absent council heads publicly called for an internal investigation into Veth Orun and the 2 heads most deeply implicated in the classified documents. The Arathian Confederacy formally introduced a motion in the Assembly to suspend the Council's enforcement authority pending constitutional review. The motion passed, not unanimously, but it passed, by mid-afternoon. Veth Orun was escorted to a restricted chamber on its own station by members of its own species oversight body who had been watching the broadcasts with the particular stiff silence of people who are doing very difficult arithmetic about their own futures. It did not resist. On the morning of the 4th day, Ariam Sol walked back into the Grand Assembly Chamber. The tiers were full again. The air was different this time, not the casual, half-attentive noise of the first hearing, but something focused and tight, the way a room feels when everyone in it understands that what happens next will matter for a long time. Ariam stood at the floor and did not look at the council platform, where only 4 heads were now seated, the remaining ones interim appointed by their own species overnight. She looked at the assembly, then she laid out the terms: full galactic standing for humanity, recognized, registered, and non-negotiable. Open access to every FTL relay route in the network, with no restrictions, no permits, no reviews, reparations for 22 years of economic blockade to be calculated by an independent commission and paid within 5 years. The formal return of all assets seized from human colonies under false jurisdiction, including infrastructure, resource claims, and territorial designations, and a permanent binding prohibition on the application of species quarantine protocols for political or economic purposes. She spoke for 34 minutes. She did not raise her voice once. When she finished, she placed her data reader on the table and waited. The interim council head, a Salon elder who had spent the past 2 days looking like a person trying very hard to be calm, asked for a brief recess. Ariam said that was fine. She sat down. They came back in 41 minutes. They signed in 48 hours. 48 hours after the recess. Not 48 hours after the demand. The actual signing happened faster than Ariam had scheduled for, because 3 of the 4 interim heads had separately communicated through back channels that they wanted this resolved quickly and cleanly before the constitutional review expanded into their own records. The document was formal, witnessed, and broadcast on the open frequency the same hour it was signed. Director Yuna watched the broadcast from the bunker beneath the Himalayas, alone except for 2 aides who had fallen asleep at their consoles. She read the document twice. Then she turned off the screen and sat in the dark for a while. She thought about the 14 years, the broken sleep, the failed tests, the moments when it had felt impossible. She thought about Daewon standing at the edge of the dock, saying quiet, honest words to a crowd of exhausted people. She did not cry, but she sat in the dark for a long time. On Earth, people stepped outside. They looked up at a sky that no longer had a blockade vessel sitting behind it. They stood in streets and fields and on rooftops, and they were quiet because some things are too large for noise. The supply ships had already been cleared for the new route. The first convoy would arrive in 4 days. After 20 years of slow starvation, it felt unreal enough that people kept checking the broadcasts just to confirm it was true. It was true. On the orbital station, Jun-Ho stood at the observation window for the last time that evening. Saturn was not visible from this window. There was only the dark, and the stars, and the distant blinking lights of the first incoming convoy. Minho came and stood beside him, the way he always did. "So," Minho said, "what do we do now?" Junho watched the convoy lights moving through the dark. They were slow and steady, unhurried. They had the whole route ahead of them. "We make sure," Junho said quietly. "They never forget why they signed." Minho nodded. He didn't say anything else. There was nothing else to say. The convoy kept coming. The stars held still. And for the first time in 22 years, the space around Earth felt like it belonged to the people who lived there.